Woke has suffered at the hands of the Nigerian vocabulary. The word once used to describe political consciousness has now become a slur, a punchline.
Deeply disappointing to see a Nigerian disinfected by the woke mind virus.
Everything is woke, everybody is woke, the environment is woke right now.
But more importantly, a form of dismissal to shut down conversations.
What she actually means to say is that we are in a critical thinking crisis.
Let's talk about the rise of anti-intellectualism. Now, recently, I've been seeing a lot of commentary about the state of discourse and conversations within Nigerian online spaces, that it's quote-unquote of low intellect. And so I started to ask, do we also have a rise in anti-intellectualism, or is it embedded in our social fabric? I have a hypothesis for what is fueling this anti-intellectualism. Number one, it is the content industrial complex in the age of social media. Number two, it is the democratization of conspiracy theories. Number three, it is the intellectual and political fatigue of the post-EndSARS era. Number four, it is the domino effect of Western anti-intellectualism. And of course, number five, it is the state of the economy and the educational infrastructure. Now let me just issue this disclaimer, because once people hear anti-intellectualism, they immediately become defensive and stuff like that, as if to say that because there is anti-intellectualism, does that mean that they are not intelligent? So let me just dispel that. Hofstadter actually delineates and distinguishes between intelligence and intellect. Intelligence, according to Hofstadter, is employed in a narrow, immediate, and predictable range. So what that means is that students in school that can cram and pass exams may be intelligent, but may not be highly intellectual. And so for Hofstadter, again, intellect is defined as the critical, contemplative, and creative parts of the mind.
Now, education alone is not enough. Nigerians must engage in critical thinking.
And therefore, when we talk about anti-intellectualism, which is often defined as hostility towards academics and public intellectuals, but it's also hostility to the critical, contemplative, interrogative parts of the mind. The social media age has introduced the content industrial complex, where with a phone and a ring light, you too can be a media company. But more importantly is that everything that exists on the internet online becomes content. And when everything becomes content, knowledge loses its meaning. Now, there's this thing that tech bros do that I find very fascinating, where with technology, it is aimed to democratize. I'm democratizing banking, I'm democratizing knowledge, I'm democratizing. And with social media specifically, it's all about democratizing access to knowledge, access to information, etc. And so not only has knowledge and information been democratized, but all information has now been flattened. Now, the thing with the internet is that it gives the illusion of a flat hierarchy where everything is equal. And so when everything is flattened into content, it means that all knowledge becomes content. All content becomes consumable, and all consumption is equal. And so whether it is memes or skits or an article or even a sociological video essay that is research backed, it is all content. And so what this also creates, and how this fuels anti-intellectualism, is that it induces a form of technological hubris.
This occurs when someone who has access to the internet thinks that they have the same or equal knowledge to someone who has expertise in that specific field.
The barrier to entry for conspiracy theories have now become ridiculously low. You can access them in your comment section, in a video, through a meme, through a skit, etc. And so this zeitgeist, where conspiracy theories are easily accessible and democratized, gets further entrenched during the COVID era. In fact, it becomes a conspirator's wet dreams. Conspiracy theories about whether or not a pandemic is a hoax, or 5G towers and mass surveillance. And so my hypothesis is that I don't think we fully recovered from the conspiratorial thinking that was further entrenched during that COVID era. Now, 2020 was such a politically heavy time in Nigeria and within the Black diaspora.
What I appreciate is how interconnected it has all become. One of the most glaring examples of this was during the George Floyd movement in America. Yeah. It swept the globe. And then one of the biggest protests happened in Nigeria. It was the End SARS movement. And this was huge. People were going, Nigerians coming out saying, hey, we demand more from our government. We demand more from our police.
Whilst it was such a devastating time within politics, there was a lot of politics of hope. And within that, there was a lot of consciousness raising. In fact, you couldn't even say something on social media that was not related to the politics of the time. That's how I would say it was our most intellectually stretched time within public discourse, both online and offline. And I think the aftermath wasn't the outcome that we had hoped. In fact, it was more devastating than that, especially given the Lekki Tollgate massacre in October 2020. And so that ushered in a politics of disillusionment, disenfranchisement, and not just a return to apathy from what we saw before, but I think even worse, a form of regression. That for being so politically stretched within that time and all the hope and for it to have happened like that, I think there was almost a regression politically and also within our discourse. So moving from a time when all the conversations that were happening online were politically inclined and almost intellectually stimulating to now whatever state of discourse that we're seeing now in the public domain. And so I think that just the devastation of the politics of 2020 has led to a regression in our public discourse. We're living in Trump's America, even in Nigeria. Now, you've probably heard the phrase, when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. But that's precisely what I think is happening. In Trump's America, his style of populist politics has been termed by some as a feel to anti-intellectualism. From his reference of, I love the poorly educated.
We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
To his policies regarding educational institutions, to his defunding, for example. And so this kind of policies has been termed as some form of the fuel or a factor behind the anti-intellectualism that we're seeing in the American political climate. And I think the hypothesis around that is that whatever happens in America's democratic ecosystem sets the tone for the rest of the world. There's a quiet understanding that America embodies Western liberal democracy. So the cracks within their political landscape also becomes the cracks within the concept of liberal Western democracy.
What I'm starting to realize, and what a lot of scholars are starting to realize, is our views of democracy are very intertwined with our views of America.
Now, if you don't believe me, check out how many world leaders are now using the term fake news.
The phrase fake news is now a big part of the American political discourse.
You are fake news.
Sir, but the president's favorite saying has also gone global, especially among authoritarian leaders.
And we're living in a fake news era, as you know.
Venezuela's president...
This is the real fake news.
And over in Russia, the foreign ministry made a special section of its website for journalism that's critical of the country. They call it the anti-fake news page. Malaysia's prime minister...
Unfortunately, when the government's opponents spread fake news, some people believe them.
All these leaders seem to have been inspired to call out fake news by a country where a free and vibrant press is supposed to be considered essential to a high-functioning democracy.
Perhaps the most enduring and compelling driver of anti-intellectualism in Nigeria is the education system. When knowledge is not pursued for its own sake, it is mined for its utility. To pass an exam, to avoid carryover, to get a job. Hofstadter calls this unreflective instrumentalism. And I think within the Nigerian society is this binary between book smart versus street smart. AKA, now book we go chop. The fusion of instrumentalist thinking converges with religious deference, where knowledge is only worthwhile if it exists to serve authority. How can you build a society with strong critical thinking when it's considered sacrilegious to question?